I'm Scott.
I'm Rim.
I'm Anne-Marie.
All right, and two of
You
us.
almost said we are the hosts of Geek.
We're not. Two of us are just some lousy podcast hosts with a podcast called Geek Nights, and we did this panel at PAX East one time.
But we're just two jerks who know more about games than we do about anything else.
Right? And we come here to MAGFest, to the MAG Educational, is it Educational Symposium? Is that what they call it? Right? Sure, whatever. Which means that people way smarter than us are like, hey, can I be on your panel? And we're like, yes, please. All right, so here we have Dr. Porter joining us to redo this panel. Yes, clap, smarter person. Okay. So yeah. All right, so I wrote this panel originally intending to just be like, man, we got all these kids gambling these days. I got to rant about that at a convention. And then I did research and found out I couldn't just say what I wanted and be right at the same time. And I did research, so we did this panel instead. All right, so for as long as games have existed, this is from a Zatoichi movie, I don't know which one, maybe the first one. Games have been demonized by society, right? Here's, Japanese gangsters gambling, being demonized, right? Here's, if you've ever seen the movie The Music Man, right? It was all about the demonization.
A different River City.
Yes.
You forgot the jokes you embedded in this.
Of course, I did this once.
Scott does a panel once, and like a fish, it's just gone from his brain. He'll write a panel, there's video of him doing it, and he won't remember that this happened.
I'll read a book, and the game will be, all right, Scott, name one character's name from the book. It's like, I don't know, I finished the book already. All right? And this is a great photo. The person on the left with the hammer is our Mayor LaGuardia smashing a pinball machine, right? Because the line at the time was that pinballs were a way for the mafia to turn children into gambling addicts and to take all the children's nickels.
Yeah, because the Don really needs those nickels.
Yeah,
that's the big money.
A nickel in Mayor LaGuardia's days, that was something.
Still not enough for the mob to get involved.
Anyway. And of course, everyone knows about these times, right, where D&D was literally Satan.
D&D was literally banned. Like, this is more recent than you think. I was in middle school in the mid-90s, and D&D books were banned from my school because of a concerned group of parents. Magic cards were banned. We had to play Magic secretly. They were happy for us to play euchre and gamble for money. But if they saw a Magic card, we got detention.
Mm-hmm. We didn't have that problem because I was in Connecticut.
Michigan's an interesting place.
But yeah, these are all real things, right? The demonization of games.
Yeah,
right?
Dungeons and Dragons, just harmless fun, or sorcery?
I sure wish it was sorcery.
In a newspaper.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
Right?
If you could actually do magic, that'd be so cool.
I guess they were right in one way, in that I totally think Satan is cool, and I like metal music. But... right? And even today, right? You think, oh, well, that D&D, that was the end of it. It's like, no, I found several people, right, on the internet being like, Harry Potter is Satan, Pokemon is Satan, right? Don't let your kids do these things, right? This continues, right? Right? Oh, yeah, there's actual Satan. Kick ass. All right, awesome. Right, and of course, right,
this really hit like a fever pitch. Like, this was like sort of the moment when popular media started to, like, on TV, there were news reports everywhere, like, Mortal Kombat will make your kids into killers.
Yeah, this was even in Connecticut, right? The D&D didn't get to Connecticut, this did, right? It was on the news, like local news, like, do not play Mortal Kombat, don't let your kids play it, oh my god, it's bloody and violent, and you tear someone's spine out.
I remember parents protesting at the arcade. Remember arcades? There used to be arcades. I remember parents protesting at tilts, like, to get the Mortal Kombat machine taken out.
Whoa, that's crazy. We had them at the movie theater. Right? Okay, so, I don't know if anyone remembers the person on the left or knows the person on the right. You should know both, right? But this was huge in the early 2000s, right? There was this dude, Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson.
And he was this lawyer from Florida man, right? And he was so mad about violence in video games, and it was already past the Mortal Kombat days, it was the Grand Theft Auto days.
He was mad that video games existed.
Right. So he was arguing, like, hey, violence, he really believed this. He wasn't, like, insincere, right, or just had some ulterior motive. He was just a lawyer who he's not a lawyer anymore, he was disbarred. But he legitimately believed that, these video games were going to create some society of violent children, right? Or people that grew up and then there would be guns in the streets, everyone shooting each other, right? Jane McGonigal on the right, a much smarter person, wrote the book saying actually games are great for society, right? They make people better, they make you healthier, they're awesome, right? We already did that, okay. Right. This slide is in here because we did the panel at PAX, right? So Penny Arcade is always relevant
I guess the
there.
point to realize here is that, like, I don't want to say like normal people, but like people who don't pay that much attention to like internet and media kind of believe Jack Thompson and just assumed he was right.
Well, because it sort of makes common sense. It's like, yeah, if someone's watching all this crazy violent shit, aren't they, right?
But you saw this dichotomy in the gaming spaces, like at gaming conventions, Jack Thompson was ridiculed for being an idiot. And outside of those spaces, he was seen as a very important person, like shedding light on this real damage to society. And there was very little discourse between those two groups. So our worry, like the reason we originally wanted to do this talk was we were worried that are there real harms that we don't talk about because gamers got really defensive of gaming in this era? Like people would like not want to debate anyone that brought these topics up, even if the topics needed some consideration. Jack Thompson poisoned the well of the research into games, I think.
Yeah, and there was publication bias issues for a while where there was such an effort to look into how video games cause violence that studies that showed they didn't cause violence weren't being published. And but the science is self-correcting, and since then a lot of studies showing those null findings have been published since then. So.
But yeah, I was also, I was kind of afraid because, the Penny Arcade had this huge fight with Jack Thompson, right? And, just the general...
Did he sue them, I think, at one point?
I don't remember the exact details of the fight, right? I'm just demonstrating that the fight happened. But there was, after that big fight, it beat the climate in the culture of gaming people, right? People in the gaming culture, whatever you want to define that as, was that if you said anything negative about games, right? If you said games are harmful in any way, people would come back at you, even if it was true.
We were
right?
we were at a panel at Penny Arcade Expo when we did this panel, and there was a different panel talking about like monetization and loot boxes and stuff, and it was all industry people who were like, loot boxes are the only way to fund the industry. They're super
Oh my
important.
gosh.
They're not that bad, and they were really like defending this party line.
Well,
to
it's
a
'cause
point
that's
that was
how they eat.
uncomfortable.
They're not loot boxes, they're surprise mechanics.
Right. Right? So that's why, I was afraid to do this panel in the first place, because I'm going to come out here and say negative things, about games, right? And it's like, if I find that there are harms of games, right? We already, we know that violence isn't one of the harms of games. But what if there are other harms? Every time I tried to argue for those on the internet, people shot me down, and I wanted to be like, well, if there are harms, then we need to address those, right? We can't just be like, everything about games is great, even though many things about games are great.
But simultaneously, this is the thing we thought about a lot, because games also started having a lot of like direct positive influences. Child's
Yes.
Play, one of the biggest charities for like children in hospitals for their psychological well-being, came out of the fight with Jack Thompson. Penny Arcade made Child's Play to prove that games can be a positive influence on society, and partly as a big FU to Jack Thompson.
Yeah,
Like,
people now today just see Child's Play as like the gaming charity for kids in hospitals, and they don't know the origin that it was made specifically to give Jack Thompson the middle finger.
Yeah, and I've actually done research with kids that are undergoing painful medical procedures. I worked in a lab where they had these kids undergoing chemotherapy play video games to distract them from the pain that they were experiencing during the procedure, or burn wound treatment procedures, which take a really long time. So I mean, well, as a kid, what would you rather do? Just sit there doing nothing, or would you rather be playing a game or at least something to distract you? So they use them in hospitals. I know Johns Hopkins has video games for kids in like the cancer wards.
Yeah, some of the articles I've seen about it, there was some evidence basically that it wasn't just that it distracted them, but they actually would experience less pain, or at least they would report in
That's
the pain
right.
scale that they experienced less pain.
Yes, they have less pain perception. Yeah.
So if you want to donate to Child's Play, you can go down to the MAGFest speedrun area, and you can donate right at that table over there, which would be totally awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we talk about who Jane McGonigal is, right? Researcher and author of a book called Reality is Broken, right? Yes?
Yeah,
there you go.
Jane McGonigal is someone I think you should look to for inspiration in this space, because I think she was the first prominent voice that really was just putting her career on the line and saying, no, these are positive effects, games are good, games can help us. And she was really, she was attacked for this for a long time. She's still attacked for this in some circles.
All right, yeah. So she made this thing called Super Better, which was like an app that was that the app uses like gamification to help you. I think it was mostly concussion symptoms, because she suffered a concussion and she was trying to help people who had the similar situation.
She suffered a serious concussion.
Right, like big time, like, NFL level, right? She didn't play football, though.
But what happened, it's not just that Super Better helped, it's that there is clinical evidence that Super Better was effective compared to a placebo. It worked like medicine. That's why we got a little worried, because if a game that is helping someone acts like medicine and has a measurable effect that is helpful, poison also exists in the same world as medicine. If a game can be medicine, then theoretically a game could also be poison.
Yeah, and all depends on the type of game. You know, we're generalizing here, but every game is different. So some games might be helpful and some games might be harmful. It really just depends.
All right, so I talked about this already, right? But it's like, okay, could games actually cause harm? So I researched. I tried to think of all the different possible ways a game could be harmful and research each and every one and to find out the truth, right? After, instead of just going with what I felt was right, which is what all the wrong people were doing, right? So which of these people was right? We know, but okay. All right, so this first one, which was answered a long time ago.
Yeah, we'll go through the easy ones, like the harms that people say, like, do games make kids violent?
Do they? Most likely not.
Highlighted is the much more direct evidence that the doctor has brought to the table for us.
Yeah, so I can talk about the research a bit. I've done research in this area myself. So the APA is the American Psychological Association. So their new statement says that they have seen evidence that it causes short-term increases in aggression. So we're talking about aggressive feelings. This is when you do like a questionnaire and it says like on a scale of 1 to 5, like I feel mad. Like that's kind of what we're talking about. Or aggressive cognition, so you'll pair two words together that are violent more quickly. Oh. But once again, they found that only lasts for about 5 minutes.
So it's like you're mad that you lost, and then you're not actually become a more violent person in general?
It's not that you lose. Like they'll just play either a violent game or a non-violent game. So there's no competition element.
Oh, okay.
But they find that you're just primed to have more aggressive cognitions for 5 minutes, and then it's gone.
Okay.
So yeah, and then this big review, this is by Dr. Ferguson, who is the biggest influencer in turning the tide on like the conversation about violence in games. And he looked at 101 studies. So he did a look at bivariate studies, and what I mean by that is bis 2. So these studies just looked at video games and aggression and nothing else. They didn't look for any other possible explanations, and they found some small effects on like aggressive feelings and cognitions. But then these other studies that controlled for other factors didn't find that relationship because other things are more important, like your family situation, if you're around family members that are violent, peers that are doing other violent activities. Depression is a really big indicator. So like and gender like also makes a difference a little bit too. So when you control for those factors, you don't see the connection between violent games and aggression anymore.
Yeah, you sent us this paper, and as I was reading through it, even as a layman, like I'm not a doctor, I don't even have a master's, but as I'm reading through this, it's just like, here's one reason why these studies were flawed. Here's another, and another, and another, and another, and there's so look, it's failure to control for third variables, like you just.
Yeah, so like those family factors. And the APA did like amend its statement saying that, yeah, we find these short-term increases in aggressive feelings, but we don't really see these real-world effects. So we don't see gamers like doing mass shootings. There's no evidence to support that. And that's what Ferguson is saying. It's like, you really have to look at these other more important factors, like their family situation and depression, in order to look at that.
So those other factors, though, those would make a more aggressive person, right? Like if you have a bad family situation or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, these are correlational. They're not causation.
Right, okay.
So everything here is correlational. So they just find that people that are exposed to more family violence or family neglect, like they don't really have much contact with their family, tend to show more delinquent behaviors.
But if we wanted to fight violence in society, we would be better off focusing on fixing those other problems than preventing children from playing Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's the same thing with mental health is the tricky part too, like with depression and other mental health issues. Did they have those first and then they played the violent games? Did the violent games make the mental health issues worse? We're not really sure, but it seems like we should be focusing on the mental health aspect rather than the games.
Yet in this era, Congress started looking at passing laws to regulate video game violence as opposed to maybe fixing our healthcare system.
Just like Mayor LaGuardia with the pinball machine.
Yeah,
right?
sometimes I wonder if they use it as a scapegoat because it's just easier easier to point the finger at video games than like it's their families or it's mental health.
I think it's
like,
also
those are just more complicated.
It's also easier to legislate, and it's also easier to sell politically.
I think so. Yeah.
Especially if it's something new. Like video games are a new media. Like a few years ago at Mages, one of the other doctors made a really good point that video games are the first new medium that humans have invented in like our history in a long time. Like we
movies,
we came up with writing, we came up with radio, we came up with television. Video games are new. Board games are not new. Board games have been around since like pre-Rome, as far as we can tell. But video games are new. Look at new kinds of music. Heavy metal was demonized.
Right.
Rock music was Elvis was demonized. Elvis.
Rock and roll music was demonized. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, all right, so violence not a problem, right?
This one I was a little more worried about.
Right, so even if a game doesn't make someone more aggressive and turn them into someone with a violent nature, would, say, a very good simulation game, right? Because you can have a flight simulator and those train pilots to fly planes. There are people who use flight simulators and then when they finally get in a real plane, they know how to fly it. So could a video game that is a, shooting simulator teach someone to be better at shooting so they practice at home and then they go and murder a bunch of people, right? Is that a real thing to worry about?
Also, I think we said we're going to save questions to the end. Yeah. Okay, if you don't mind. So keep those in mind and we will answer those.
All right.
But this game is, I was thinking about this when I was a kid. This is a game called Police Quest SWAT. Police Quest was a hyper-realistic like point-and-click adventure where you had to do police procedures, and police are a problematic issue in society for a lot of reasons, good and bad, but this game was different from those games. It was a real simulator of SWAT tactics. Like, police SWAT tactics. Like, if you play this game, it teaches you, like, here is how a SWAT team officer will sweep a room for hostiles when they go in, how to cover a door with a gun, how to load weapons. Like, and it was a dumpy old PC game. This looks way better than you think it would in real life.
These are pre-rendered graphics, right? That's why it looks great, even though it's super old.
Yeah, this game ran in, like, 4P resolution.
Yeah, we're not. The missed topic is off. It's off topic for this panel.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So, is this a thing to worry about? Yes and no, right? So, sort of, right? So if you're just playing like Counter-Strike at home, right, and you get a real gun, you're not gonna know what the hell to do with that, right? It's because Counter-Strike doesn't show you how the gun operates. You're just, pointing and clicking, which is completely different from holding a large, heavy weapon, aiming it and firing, right? It has lots of other mechanisms on it you have to deal with. Right.
Yep, you don't learn the fast and frugal heuristics, like how a human learns to be good at like sports or killing or any of those things.
You can't be good at soccer playing FIFA.
Reflexes, muscle memory, and these like very quick, fast and frugal heuristics, which is just a sports medicine term. You can look it up, and you can't learn those from a mouse and keyboard. This does not translate into this.
Right. But if you did have a real simulation, right, of actual stuff, maybe like a VR simulation involving like a plastic simulated gun, then maybe it could, but good thing no one has those in their house.
Well, we kind of do now because of the increased adoption of VR. The Oculus Quest has opened up the door to simulator games that can teach real-world violence skills.
Are there any on the Oculus Store?
Yes.
Oh.
There are some hyper-realistic gun sims.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Hyper realistic in terms of the feedback on the controllers or or the graphics?
In terms of the graphics, in terms of the interaction space.
Oh, okay.
I know someone who's an FBI agent, and he played actually a really abstracted game that's not hyper-realistic, Super Hot, like VR game.
Oh, yeah, I know Super Hot.
But he said that when he played the game, he'd never done VR before, it triggered like those reaction feelings in him, and he started like sweating and like getting the adrenaline response that he would get in a real fighting situation.
Oh, okay.
And he also reacted the way he would in real life, and it mapped.
Okay.
Like he was very good at the game because of his real world training.
Oh.
Even in this highly abstracted environment. And like this one on the bottom, this drone pilots, a flight simulator for a drone is the same as flying a real drone.
Yeah,
There's
this is
no
not,
difference.
Yeah, this is not a joke. Like the military legit wants to find pro gamer players, right? Pro gamers to recruit to be drone pilots because piloting a drone, 21st century warfare, you're sitting in like some building in Colorado or something, and on the other side of the world, the drone is flying, murdering people, right? And you're literally, I've seen controlling it with like an Xbox controller, right? That's a real thing, right? And that's what, right? So in that extent, it's like, yes, it can train you to be violent with a weapon like that, right? So, yeah, if they come recruiting you, I would suggest saying no.
So, well, from an opinion standpoint, Is there a point at which something like that needs to be regulated, or is that like really free speech, like to make a game, if it doesn't cause someone to cause harm, but it teaches someone a dangerous skill? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends on the context too, because some of these training simulations have been used in the military before. So, I mean, in some cases it can be helpful, but do you want that to be just available to the general public? I mean, it really just depends who's playing it and why, I think.
But if like I think why is the important part. Because
Yeah.
some indie gamer is gonna make like a hyper-realist, or like not like shoot, don't shoot. Like you can just get real police shoot, don't shoot simulators. Obviously they don't work in the real world because police always shoot, but that's a separate topic. But those things already exist, and I think it's more the point of we can't just say these are banned, it's hard to regulate them, but we really need to understand who is playing them and why. Is
Yeah.
someone playing that game to learn how to shoot better? And are they going to shoot for a bad reason?
Right, you could be using it to just because you're into legitimate marksmanship, just shooting targets. You have no interest in shooting people ever, right? You
Yeah.
just got your 22, whatever.
Well, and I've also heard, I've done some research on stories veterans have told, and they will play super realistic, like military war games, and they'll kind of explain it as after they leave the military, they kind of like to be back in that environment. So some will say, they don't want to be back in that environment because they find it triggering in a way. They don't want to, they'll have PTSD and they don't want to experience that. But some of them find it cathartic. Like they like to go back and re-experience it and reevaluate it and think about it. So I don't know. It really depends on the person.
So
Yeah.
I was reading some interesting accounts.
Yeah.
I'm reading this really dire history of World War I right now, and it talks about how that was the first war where there was like a big surge in PTSD.
Yes.
And it's one of the ideas from these first-hand accounts of the soldiers was that it was too quick from being in this like hellish combat environment to they're back in Paris and everything's fine there. Like that night, they're back in a comfortable, safe place, and that jump without the time to process and sort of like work through
Is
it.
that because of the increase in like transportation
Yep.
technology, right? Whereas in previous wars, you would just be walking.
Or yeah, you're on a boat for a month to get back.
Well, I also think it's like with the trench warfare and like the new technology was like a lot scarier. The rules changed a
So
lot.
the degree of the
Yeah.
shift, right? So like the Civil War, right? The battlefield is still horrifying, but it's not as horrifying as a World War I battlefield. So the change, yeah. And I guess also, your home, if you're in the Civil War, wasn't as nice as Paris, right?
Yeah, but mainly it's just trying to reintegrate into civilian lifestyle after you've been in like the military and these life or death situations. So I've heard some describe it as like a grieving process, leaving the military and being a veteran. So they find it really important to use these games to process kind of those feelings.
That almost sounds like then
Yeah.
these hyper-realistic simulations are just going to be a tool like any other tool we have. They could cause harm, but they could also help people.
Yeah, it really just depends on the person.
All right. So let's look at some more harms, potential harms. So yeah, sports or games deal with it. Sports injuries, yeah, they're real, right? But obviously what we care about is injuries playing, esports, right?
I bought that stock image. People laugh at it every time. I think it
I
was
really
well
like
spent.
that one.
Money well spent on the stock image. Yeah, I mean, that chair doesn't look to be the greatest chair. That probably will cause some back injuries. But
Yeah,
if
look
you,
at this. No lumbar
if you-
support there at all.
Yeah, if you got a Herman Miller Aeron chair, I think you might be safe, right? I don't know. Right, so is there anything to worry about here? So the big ones, right, that adults go on and on about is like, oh, you sit too close to the TV, your eyes will get messed up. That's actually not true. Your eyes are going to be messed up if they're messed up, and they won't if they won't.
Adults or people who have developed. For young children like under 6, there is evidence that using 3D screens, using close-up
Yeah.
screens it can cause myopia potentially, and it can also cause focusing issues.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like, I've sat at a computer screen my whole life. It's just an anecdote. But my eyes are actually the best eyes of all my friends, right?
Hey, I've augmented my eyes to be better than yours.
Sure. Right? So you don't have too much to worry about in the eye department. You don't need to buy those weird yellow glasses. Those are like some kind of rip-off deal. Save your money, right? But will your hand and wrist get messed up? Absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Right? Totally. It's not a joke. There are real esports people, right? Hax' retirement in the uncertain world of esports. This guy Hax was legit. Super amazing player, right? A lot of Korean StarCraft players had to quit because, RTSs, that's like the most hand and wrist game ever, right? In terms of like, the instructions per second you gotta type in there, right? They messed up their hands and they couldn't keep playing. They just careers in the esports were over. They had to move into other careers. I've known like actually a couple Korean StarCraft people went into like television and entertainment because they couldn't play StarCraft as good anymore, right? The amount of time you can spend doing it is not long, right? A lot like if you play football. It's like you don't play football for a few years and then you're done. Your bones are broken.
So where's the line? Like, what's the line of acceptable harm in a sport? I think football's past that line, to be honest, in my personal opinion. Other sports, I think, are below the line, but it's hard to say. Like, I don't play those sports professionally. I can't assume the harms and the risks and the, like,
And there are
consenting
people,
nature of others.
there's people who are willing. They're like, I know what football will destroy my life. I want to do it anyway.
But there are people who are willing to do gladiatorial combat. I don't think we should let them.
I don't think we should let them either.
Yeah. But I wonder if things will adapt, like there'll be braces or other things developed to kind of counteract those wrist injuries.
Or players' unions. The thing with football, while football is a messed up situation, there is a players' union that at least ostensibly is looking out for them.
It's a weak union.
Yeah.
The baseball union is a better example. The baseball union is super strong.
Yeah,
right?
or like the hockey union is kind of a mixed bag.
That's all
but,
right.
like, hockey has instituted recent changes in concussion protocols to like minimize the harm of the sport, but we don't see that yet in esports. Like there isn't a union or like a regulatory body that's saying this is beyond the line or this kind of wrist motion should be minimized in sport. Like we don't have that data yet. And kids are hurting themselves because esports is getting monetized way faster than traditional sports did. It took baseball 50 years to actually make money. But esports already, you have kids who are 16 playing a professional game. We don't know what a 40-year-old esports professional's life is like. We don't know what that harm is really doing, I don't think.
We don't know what their life is like because their career is over before they're 40.
Yeah.
Right?
But like we figured out like a lot of the problems with hockey because we saw what was happening to hockey goalies when they got into their 40s. Terry Sawchuk had a lot of issues probably because he probably had 20 or 30 concussions.
Did you
over
put
the
a
course
picture of
of
Terry
Yeah.
Sawchuk in the
I did not
panel?
put a picture of Terry
Okay.
Sawchuk.
You don't want it. Don't look at a picture of Terry Sawchuk. All right. So that's something to wear. All right. Table spot for sports injuries.
This was just a gag. We play this game Jungle Speed, and we were looking for evidence of harm in tabletop games, and I found this post. But that post is by Jason Morningstar, the guy who designed the RPG Fiasco.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So in 2006, I mean, this is the thing that's happened a lot. Jungle Speed it's a game, right? All right. So here's an obvious harm of games. Everyone knows what went down, right? We don't have to go over this. I hope. Right? Okay. Okay. That's right. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to harms of the industry, right? So we'll talk about this, even though I think everyone knows, right? Is that, video game companies, right? We're not talking about harms to players anymore. We're talking about the harms to the people making the games, right? So in order to make video games, right, you have to go through, because of capitalism, right, you have to cause a lot of harm to yourself or your employees, right?
Back to that loot box panel. At PAX, they kept talking about how, like, without loot boxes, we cannot make money. Our studio goes bankrupt, and that's how they justified what they were doing.
Right.
It's like you made money before, somehow.
Right. Well, they sort of made money,
You know?
right? So that in the previous model of selling games, right, is you would spend a lot of money making a game, and you would sell it at a high price once, and you'd get a pile of money back to recoup your investment and pay everyone, and then you either had to start on the next game, right, or just fold. Be like, all right, take the money and go home. And if you had a game that was like a flop, that set you back a ton and you had to let everyone go. So you couldn't really make a stable long-term career. If you look at the resumes of gaming industry people, they're constantly changing studios, laid off here, right? Even today, even though the model has sort of, changed from that, studios are constantly huge layoff here. I see on Twitter all the game dev friends, right? Oh, who's hiring? Here's a list of places that are hiring. Tweet me, DM me, my DMs are open, right? Sorry to all the people who got laid off today at Giant Studio X.
Well,
right?
a lot of this harm comes out of one specific thing, and you can look at the price of a AAA video game to see exactly what happened. When I was a kid, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link came out. It was $70.
70, 90s dollars.
Yeah.
80s, 90s dollars.
A brand new Zelda game, Breath of the Wild, comes up today. It's what, $70-ish?
70, 20, $19, $20.
Breath of the Wild is if Breath of the Wild is the equivalent AAA game of Zelda 2 back when it came out, Breath of the Wild should have cost about $340. That is what it costs to maintain a healthy ecosystem for game developers.
Right, and then you look at like the situation that happened with the newest Pokemon, where it's like everyone got so mad that not every Pokemon is in it. And it's like, okay, you want the people to work overtime, overnight, to make all the animations for all the attacks for every single Pokemon, and there keep being more Pokemon every generation. So each generation is exponentially more difficult and expensive to develop than the previous one, right? And then you still get to buy Pokemon for only $60.
But now it's almost a choice of, we have to decide who we're going to harm, because we can either harm the people making the games by not paying them, which is what's happening, or we raise the prices of games, then games become only the purview of the wealthy.
And also, not enough people would buy them, and they still wouldn't get paid.
Yeah, we don't really know how to handle this. Like, the industry's kind of in crisis right now, and people aren't really talking about this as much as they should be. I don't know what's going to happen. I think games are in trouble right now.
Well, expensive video games are in trouble, right?
Tabletop's in trouble for similar reasons.
Tabletop's in trouble for similar-ish reasons, right? But I think cheaply developed things don't have to worry about this as much, right? They have to just worry about selling, getting any sales whatsoever.
But this causes psychological harm and like physical harm to the people making games. Working 90-hour weeks is not sustainable. That can kill people. It has killed people.
Yeah, chronic stress. So I did some stress research too. Chronic stress does cause cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure over time. Yeah. So, and also issues with your immune system. So all of those things can definitely get worse.
This is worrying just as a gamer. I'm a fan of hockey, but I watch people get concussions. I'm a fan of video games, but people are killing themselves to make my games. I have a smartphone. People are literally dying in mines. The problem is it just comes down to a critique of capitalism or late capitalism. Like, I don't know where we go with this. Like, I don't know how to address these concerns.
But yeah, I think there is, you sort of have to think about, the line of when you're buying a game, some studios are better than others, at least, right? So at least think about it before you buy a game, how much you're paying for it, how you're paying for it, who made it, right? When did they make it? Who's going to get the money when you buy the game, right? Just think about it a little bit. It's the best you can do because, all consumption is immoral in capitalism. All right. So
Here's
now,
what we actually want to talk about.
yeah, and we have someone smarter than us to talk
That's
about
another
it,
stock
right?
image. Don't worry, I didn't just take a picture of someone's random kid.
Right. So, of course, ever since, even when I was a kid, before they had, like, the truly addicting games like the MMOs and whatever, right? Parents were just worried, even they weren't worried about your eyeballs or the devil, right? They were worried about you just playing it too damn much, and they wanted you to spend less time on it, right? I remember there was like that NES thing where like you could had like a key, like quarters into it.
Anecdata. I was the opposite. My parents were gamers. Like they were video gamers from the beginning. So they let me play as many video games as I wanted, and in fact, we had a console on every TV in the house.
That's awesome.
The only time they'd kick me off of a console is because they wanted to play a game.
Right. I mean, my parents let me play a lot of games, but there was still a limit, right? It's like, it's time to play dinner, stop playing.
I can't pull the survivor bias stuff. I turned out fine. Like, survivor bias is a big part of the problem talking about this kind of stuff, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, I had infinite access to ultra-violent video games, and I played them forever, and I turned out totally fine. Like, yeah, sure, maybe you did.
Just throughout my gaming existence, right, with my lack of academic knowledge in the subject, I found myself sometimes arguing yes and no, right? I would see people playing MMO. There was MMO guy, right?
Oh, that guy.
In my freshman year of college, one of my friend's roommates played Asheron's Call. Anyone know Asheron's Call? Yeah. Okay. He played that. We only ever saw him either going to class or playing Asheron's Call. Even late at night, he was playing Asheron's Call.
Like, it was to the point that, in retrospect, like, he needed an intervention?
Right. So that looked like addiction to me, so I believed it, and I was like, that guy has a problem. But on the other hand, I found myself not feeling addicted to any of these things, right? When I saw that I was playing something too much, I would sometimes consciously be like, I don't want to do that anymore, that's clearly a problem, and I would just stop. So I would argue both sides depending on the situation, and I didn't really know it was true, right? But today we'll find out what's true, right? Because we're not qualified to say.
You can help us here.
Yeah. So, yeah, the first article asked if video game addiction really exists. I mean, that's an important question. So, kind of fun background story. I worked with some authors who work in game addiction, and we actually did a research study here at MAGFest like 3 years ago, and we got it published. Whoa. So we asked gamers themselves, we listed the criteria in the DSM. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's where you have like general anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, all of that is listed. And so right now, internet gaming disorder is like a disorder in progress, you could say. Like they're basically asking researchers to do more research into it before they make it an official disorder. So it's not official right now, but they have like 15 criteria. So we had actual gamers at MAGFest in a panel rate the criteria into what was actually relevant to kind of help define the disorder a little bit better, because there's some criteria that don't make sense, like withdrawal is one of the criteria, which doesn't really fit for gaming. So when we talk about withdrawal, that's like heroin withdrawal. So that's like an actual physical reaction. So if you're a heroin addict and you don't take heroin, you actually have physical problems. Like you need to get treatment, or it could actually kill you if the withdrawal is bad enough. With gaming, it's not the same. So that's an example of one that was rated really low, like on the list, that's not relevant. But there were some unexpected ones like body hygiene, like taking a shower, that was like rated really high, that isn't in the DSM right now as a criteria. So it's kind of helping. So I think it might exist, but we need to really tweak and tailor the criteria for it.
Is the question more like, is it its own specific type of addictive syndrome, or is it just part of a more generalized, like addictive behavior could latch on to anything in someone's life? Like, is that the real debate? Like, it has to go one of those two ways, maybe?
Yeah, right now it's like categorized as like a behavioral addiction, kind of like gambling or like shopping addiction. So it's kind of similar to that. So it's not really similar to like heroin or cocaine or something like that.
Addiction. That's interesting.
And they do find like psychologically, in terms of your reward structures in your brain, it is similar to gambling and other behavioral addictions. They actually found similar things. And this last one, the potential harms and benefits. So anybody heard about the World Health Organization adding gaming disorder, like officially?
Oh, I did hear that.
Yeah. So it's still technically in a draft format, so they are refining it, but they're adding it. And this article does a great job showing the pros and cons. And when we talk about harms to gamers, it's all about the question of, is it stigmatizing to gamers in video games? And that's why people are really defensive on this topic, because they're saying, well, if you make it an official disorder, then you're saying video games cause mental health problems. It's stigmatizing like healthy gamers that are just playing for fun, that are just being engaged. And so that's what one side says. So you shouldn't make a disorder because you're stigmatizing something that's healthy. But the other side is saying, well, but there are real people that have problems, and it's good to have it as a disorder so they can get help. So if you have an actual problem, you can't say like, well, you're just lazy or you're just not controlling your gaming impulses enough. It's like your fault. But now it's saying, no, you have a mental health issue, and they can actually get access to insurance and real treatment for it. So that's what's like tricky. I think some people think it comes from the top down and someone decided, oh, we hate games, so we're gonna make it a disorder. But no, it really appeared organically, because we all know like those one or two people that are probably addicted, right? Like you all can, like you all know someone that you're like, yeah, that's probably unhealthy. And so that's why this disorder kind of happened, because they got all these reports of real people having a problem. So I'm kind of on the line, it probably does exist, but you just have to define it better. So like people can clearly say, okay, this is unhealthy, but this is like healthy engagement. I think that's really the problem.
But that differentiation, because the hygiene thing that came up, I hadn't even thought about that, but anecdotally, it feels like that is tightly coupled with gaming addiction and gaming spaces that I don't encounter it in other spaces.
Right, so like that's like a unique like health issue, like just remembering to shower, like go to the bathroom, also eating right. Like I had a friend who was addicted, and he just ate chips and Mountain Dew, and that was it. And he had some health problems.
But yeah, that's why, the second story I posted, 15 people died playing video games, right? Not all of them, some of them died just because like they had a heart attack coincidentally while they were playing games.
And they didn't overdose on the video game.
Obviously, right? But some of those people did legitimately, right? Were like in, internet cafes somewhere in the world, right? Playing some game nonstop, right? And then someone went to check on them finally, right? And they were just sitting there dead because they stayed there and played the game so long without moving or doing anything else.
I do know an analogous thing happens in exercise, certain kinds of exercise addiction.
Yeah, that's in the works of, I forget the name of it, but people who are obsessed with eating too healthy or exercising too much, that's starting to show up.
Then the specific marker was, it was for the exercise stuff, is people would lift and do the exercises, and then when pain got to the point of like dangerous pain, they would ignore it.
Oh, that's that's a rhabdo situation?
Yeah, like get yourself into rhabdo, don't over exercise.
Yeah, if you're exercising and it hurts, don't continue to exercise more. Your kidneys will fail. That's not a joke.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing with gaming. Like, if you need to go to the bathroom or if you need to eat something, you should do that. And I have to say, like, I got to give credit to the world of esports because they are changing the conversation and being healthy competitors. Like, I've just seen that conversation a lot. Like, because your brain has to be functioning well to do your best in a competition. So they're really pushing to exercise and eat right, even when they're competing. So I think that's definitely changing.
Like you see people laugh like you see at the hockey team, and then like there's the video of like spring training, them going to the gym. But we're seeing an equivalent in esports. Like the team will like go to the gym together and like practice and train and just like work on posture, make sure their chairs are right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's off topic, but that just made me think of the conversation about performance-enhancing drugs in esports. Like all the people using Adderall to win games, right? Yeah, we'll talk about that another time. All right, let's see what else. Oh, so these are reward schedules for rats. Yeah.
Before we get into this, what I remember when I was thinking about like addictive games, and on one hand, I would think very like free speech. People can make any media they want, and it's up for society to judge it rather than pre-censor it or anything. But then I started thinking about addictive stuff and about like, what if a game was addictive to the point that it would sort of trap people? Like it was actually a danger or a threat.
Right, because you talked about whether blaming, do we blame the player for being irresponsible? Do we blame the mental health disorder that they have causing them to behave that way? But this is, do we blame the game for being designed as a trap?
And I thought about this specifically with the old Kampugacha mechanic in Japan, because there's big news years ago. Kampugacha is this mechanic where like you win a thing and there's a random chance to win more things. It's like a very specific kind of slot machine that is re-implemented in a lot of games you probably play. And Japan banned this game mechanic. They basically said you cannot sell games that have this mechanic because it is causing harm to society that we recognize. And part of me got really mad about that. Like, what, you're saying I could ban like a card draft in a game? That feels weird. But on the other hand, the harm is real in this case. And I'm very ambivalent on it. Not in that I don't care, and that I'm pulled very equally in opposite directions and I don't know what to do. This is a chart of reward schedules and like very simple conditioning training. I don't think we're gonna go too deep into all the different kinds of like reinforcement. But when you like ring a bell and someone knows to like eat the pellet.
Oh yeah.
Or there's a button and a rat hits the button and a pellet comes out. Depending on the nature of what decides when the pellet comes out, the rat's behaviors change in a very reliable way. And the most powerful one, that red one there, is called a variable reward schedule, meaning a random number of button presses causes the pellet to come out. Rats will just go crazy on that thing, way more than if it was regular. If they come out in a repeatable way, the rat will hit it 3 times, get the pellet, hit it 3 times, get the pellet, rat's full, rat's done. If it's variable, the rat will eat 1,000 pellets.
All right. So that's, of course, gambling, right? Gambling rats. So that's the original, like I said, the original... My original reason I came up with this panel in the first place was like I just wanted to rant about loot boxes, right? Because I saw, loot boxes was basically just children gambling. And in fact, the way I saw it was actually worse than gambling, right? This kind of gambling with the slot machine and the casino, I think is demonized the most by our society. But if you really think about it, when you go to a slot machine, yeah, it's ripping you off, it's bad, don't do it. But there's a chance real money comes back. You could, in a regulated casino that's not a scam casino, right? There's a chance you could hit the jackpot. It happens
you put your dollar
more
in,
than 0 times.
$2 could come out.
It's not going to happen, but it could. Someone wins the lottery. Not you, someone.
But a video game, like a video game slot machine for virtual goods, you're just putting your dollar into a paper shredder.
Right, when you put money and you buy loot boxes, you are always losing everything. Someone's just changing bits in a database. Even if you get the best loot and all the loot, I guess Counter-Strike would be like the one example because you can sell your skins, but they're cutting back on that too.
Well,
whatever.
Not to get deep into that.
Not to get deep into those
But
weeds.
in adjacent concern, a lot of the market on selling and reselling skins and things in games seems to be mob money laundering.
Yeah, just like LaGuardia was worried about.
Yeah. So in a way, he was right. It just took a while.
Right. The point is, when you pay money for loot box type stuff in games, or even just buy skins straight up or something like that, where it's not even gambling, you're just losing. All of your money is gone. You will never get real money back. right? And you think, we've had magic cards being sold to children since I was a kid in the 90s, and only now, more recently, do I realize, wait, that's just gambling, and no one recognized it then, and now it's normalized.
It got me. I would have bought an infinite number of magic boosters if my parents did not strictly limit how many. Like, they would not let me buy them even when I had money. I could get one a week.
Yeah, now I'm thankful to them. At the time, I was mad because I saw other kids who had like a boxes of boosters and had every card. Right? And
now
I
had way too many Pokemon cards.
Right, exactly.
I still have so many. I was like, I gotta get
gambling.
that Charizard.
Right? Okay, so yeah, magic cards, gambling, right? Okay, loot boxes, also gambling.
I'm mad about this enough. I play Overwatch.
Have you still never opened your loot boxes?
I was playing Overwatch. I played the game and opened loot boxes, and I realized I was so mad about loot boxes that I just stopped opening them. I have like 900 unopened loot boxes in Overwatch right now. Not only do I refuse, and full disclosure, I used to own a lot of Blizzard stock. I actually divested myself of all of it because I'm really uncomfortable with this business model.
Also the China biz.
Yeah, that too. There were multiple reasons why I divested myself. But I was uncomfortable with this business model, and I recognized that I don't know how you monetize a game like Overwatch without this.
All right.
Yeah.
So, right? So I don't know. This is relevant at PAX. So at PAX, they have there's a vendor who's been going to PAXs recently, selling these board game booster boxes, which is obviously gambling. You buy this box for a fixed price, and inside is some random board games. The way these work, and the way that Loot Crate works, and the way that a lot of things work is obviously they're gambling. The way they work is they buy all this junk, all the Funkos of characters no one likes, right? All this stuff that's like garbage that sits on your game store shelf or the nerd store shelf that no one would ever buy. And the stores were like, well, I can sell this for $0 because no one wants it, or I'll sell it to this company for like a penny. They put a bunch of stuff in there that costs them nothing that you don't want, and by making the box opaque, they trick you into buying it, and you get the surprise of opening the box, and then you get a bunch of crap. Right? Some people say they're happy with it, and it's like, well, would you have bought it if the box was clear and you could see what was inside? Probably not, right? So don't buy these from anyone. I see even in the artist alley here, there's some artists with like grab bag. There's one that has smash the pot, and there's like stuff inside, right? And I mean, that's kind of fun because you get to smash.
Fun.
I would pay for the fun of smashing the pot, and you just keep the stuff.
Might be a rupee in there.
It could be, right? But yeah, all right, so are loot boxes related to problem gambling, right? Would buying loot boxes make you into a real gambler? Most likely.
And when we did our research, we weren't that sure. We're not experts, but...
Yeah, well, and unfortunately research, this is the downside, is really slow. Like, it takes a little while to like get things going and do studies. So loot boxes are a little bit newer, so they're still catching up. So these are just correlational studies, but they have found that people who rate higher in problem gambling issues also are more likely to buy loot boxes and spend more money on loot boxes. We're not sure which way it goes, so we're not sure if like the loot boxes make people into more problem gamblers or if they just have that tendency to begin with and then they just buy more. But it seems like it's very clear it's connected. Like the correlation, I don't know if people know about correlations, but it's ridiculously high. Like the correlation value is like so high, which basically means they're almost the same thing. Like that's what it means when you see that high a correlation.
What's your R-square values?
It was like, I think it was like 0.6 or 0.7. It was pretty high up there.
So is it that there's a certain kind of person who's like susceptible to this, and therefore all forms of it are like just trap them. They're vulnerable to falling into this trap, whether it's a loot box or a slot machine or whatever.
Yeah, so they could be more susceptible, or it makes them more susceptible. Like,
So they fall into it once, and then they fall into it again because it's made them worse at avoiding.
yeah, and they've seen this both with adults and older adolescents. They've done some studies between like 16 and 18-year-olds, so it's a problem with them too. And I think they found that the two factors that made them more likely to buy loot boxes is if they were available for a limited time. I think that was like the big one that made them buy more.
I'm thinking about the penny arcade, like the pins and the limited access, and
And I think something was similar to like the random access, like it wasn't consistent. So they're like, oh, I have to buy it now, you know? So I think those were like two major factors, but we really don't know a lot about it yet. But it definitely seems like they're related.
So what if we found...
Yeah. But what's interesting is they haven't found the same effects for microtransactions.
Really?
That's a little different.
So microtransaction would be just buying a thing straight up, not
Yeah.
not a box of random stuff. Like you know what you're getting. I am buying that skin or that thing.
So they haven't really found the same thing with microtransactions. That seems to be a little different. But with loot boxes, yes, they definitely have found it.
You know, that would make sense, because one thing I've seen cited a lot is that most people aren't really good at statistics. That's not really a useful statistic, but that people specifically are bad at estimating risk and reward.
Oh, they're terrible
Just
at
in
it.
general. Okay, good, I feel that.
Yeah.
Just like playing board games, I watch people bid more in a bidding game than you could possibly get back from that asset. I'm like, what are you doing? But at least with a microtransaction, like the relationship's simple. If I pay another $1, I can play Candy Crush 9 for another 10 seconds. But with a loot box, if I pay $10, I could get an infinite number of awesome Sombra skins. What's the value of a lottery ticket is the question here.
Right. But what's interesting, like politically, like on what we should do about them. So the National Council on Problem Gambling released a statement this year. And what's interesting is the conversation is saying right now not to eliminate them, but just to regulate them and just make it clear what they are. So just clearly label them as gambling and really inform the public. So it doesn't look like at least the major players aren't trying to get rid of them completely, but just make sure people know what's happening, you know.
Well, I mean, there's certain, like Belgium got rid of them completely.
Yeah.
Right? And I think China allows them, but forces companies to publish the odds.
Yeah.
Right. And it makes me wonder, like, well, are those only the odds if you're playing in China? Are the companies here, like, because it's complete secret, like, and a casino is regulated. You know the odds in the slot machine. You know the odds in the lottery.
Yeah, by
they're
law,
published
you
in
can
the fine
request
print.
them.
They're in
Yeah.
the fine print, right? But like the odds on buying an Overwatch loot box. It's like you don't have no idea if you're in the United States, right? What the actual odds are, right? So it's like, could
Yeah.
they be like, falsely, changing the odds based on each person's behavior or doing all the other sorts of like evil-ish kind of things like that, right?
So I can't say where
It's a question of how pervasive is it, because we know it's already done.
Yeah. And what was interesting is I was doing research to try to find like how much people spend on average and like, kind of like see the scope of the financial problem. And I couldn't find statistics on it.
So
like they're not published right now that I can
have
find.
seen some of those data sets, and I've talked to people who work for certain companies that have explained like how they work. I can't name names for a lot of reasons, but I will say there are definitely companies that tailor the experience of individual players based on their past behavior.
Oh, yes.
That player has done more of X, we will give them more opportunities to do Y, and there's always a monetization like piece of that loop. It's real and it's happening.
Right? I mean, like casinos will
And
go
I'll get in
like,
a lot of trouble if I say more about that.
right? I mean, like a casino will give people like free hotel nights or whatever, but they won't they can't change the odds on a slot machine based on who's sitting there, right? But they do it as much as they can, but because of the regulation, there's a limit.
I'll bet they would if they weren't as heavily
Absolutely, they
regulated.
would, of course.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, but I mean, the thing that disturbs me the most, right, is like regardless of what people feel about whether gambling shouldn't be legal, right, whatever, I feel like it's sort of just a general agreement that children shouldn't be gambling, right? It
But I
seems-
love gambling as a kid.
I mean, maybe there's someone out there who thinks it's okay for children to be gambling, but like it's sort of been normalized by kids buying Pokemon cards for this long.
Yeah.
And no one's done anything about it, and it's only beginning to study it, right? It's like
We'll get back to the thing about people can't assess the risk-reward ratio. So even if we publish these odds, people can't make an informed
Right.
decision. Like I think it comes down to informed consent in the
Right,
end.
but I
Yeah,
think
and that's
Can
what
an
people are
adult
saying, yeah.
who doesn't understand statistics that well really be considered to have had informed consent to a certain kind of gambling?
even if the odds were published. But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that, well, I would just like to see the conversation to people use the words children gambling, right, to address the issue, right? To have people think about it in that way. Because that's what it is.
Only because I want to make sure we have time to take some questions. We have
Yeah,
8
people are
minutes
too
left.
antsy out there. They can't
So
wait. They got
we'll
no
repeat the
patience.
questions. We'll take as many
Yeah.
as we can.
All right.
We'll just go right around the room in this order.
Take Emily's questions first.
I'm really interested in the application of stuff like VR in the medical field. And I'm wondering if there's going to be problems in terms of it shifting over from like a video game regulatory body to like the FDA and like, because the parameters for, regulating medicine are very, very different than and regulating entertainment. Do you have thoughts on that?
All right, so I'm just going to repeat the question. So Emily asked about whether since the application of VR using, VR software for medical applications, right? Worrying about, the video game regulations versus, well, if you're suddenly using this as a medical thing, FDA regulations being applied to that same software.
I don't know, I think is my answer, is I'm not sure yet. I wouldn't think it'd be as heavily regulated. I don't think it'd be regulated by the FDA because they focus on more like medical drugs, like actual like medical.
I think they
drugs
regulate
and
medical
treatments.
devices, though.
Right? But yeah, I'm not sure if it would count as a medical device yet.
I don't
not
know
sure.
what super better counts as. I didn't actually read the full paper that
I don't know
talked
if it's
about like the clinical efficacy.
I don't know if
of
it's
super better.
FDA approved, even though it's.
I think it was, that was
It's
the
clinically.
news.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Part of this comes from, sorry to ask again, but like, part of this comes from a conversation I had with people at the Denver Children's Hospital, because they had to, in giving these gaming devices to children, they had to jump through a lot more bureaucratic hoops than
Yes.
giving them to children outside the hospital because
Yes.
of the environment.
Yeah, I'm sure there are internal regulations within the hospital for sure. I don't know if it would be by an overall national body.
All right. Vest dude.
So you were talking about the functions of the variable reward, the issues about loot boxes and Pokemon. And what you have to understand is that's nothing new. Low children gambling. I remember as a child in high school in the 70s, there was a company whose name I do not forget, who would sell stickers. So you get a sticker book.
Oh, I had a sticker book. I had Ninja Turtle sticker book, yeah.
And it would have like, your goal was to get them all.
I got
obsessed with those things.
I had
that was
a
a
Ninja Turtle
problem.
one.
Kids would literally not eat lunch, so they'd have the money to go buy the hats.
All right.
And you'd have them sitting there and trading. Got it, don't got it. And, that was essentially gambling.
All right.
And it was what you
You're
have to
right.
be exposed to that. Is when Magic came out, I immediately recognized it. It's like, that's just the sticker books. Screw that.
All right. All right. If you're raising your hand, make sure that was great, but please ask a question, right? If you're not asking a question, don't raise your hand. What's up, Star Hat?
What is your opinion of the whole Joker movie, incel sort of thing, like blaming a lot of the stuff on the Joker movie when it comes to going around and shooting people? Understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So the question is, what is our opinion about people blaming the Joker movie and incels on the various shootings that are happening recently, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say they found with research that the effects of violent video games and violent media are kind of similar. So, I mean, the same conversation we have, video games cause violence, that happened with TV and movies, long before, and still happens today. So I would say it's very similar where, yeah, maybe there's some priming that goes on right after you see a movie, but does it actually translate into real-world mass shootings? Probably not.
And then probably back to the correlation of that a certain kind of media might be an attractor for someone who has other unrelated issues, so that's where the correlation might come
Right.
from.
I think it's
Yeah.
if there's a particular culture of people that are doing a bad thing, right, and that culture happens to like something, right, then that something could get the blame when it's that just happens to be the thing that culture likes, right, where it's really
Yeah.
just, right, if the KKK is really into pineapples, right, suddenly people are going to be like, pineapples are evil? It's no, right, just white supremacists are evil, obviously. Just because they like pineapples doesn't make pineapples bad. All right, let's go. Wait, the
Right.
furthest back person. That's
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you talked briefly about do video games make people violent, and then also can video games sort of train violent, I guess,
Train you in violent skills.
train you to do for violent situations. But what about do video games and also just violent media as a whole, honestly? Does it normalize violence? Are there any studies on that? Does it condition people to not be as surprised by violence?
So the question was basically, does violent media normalize or desensitize people to violence?
Yes.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
I have an uneducated opinion.
Yeah, I have an anecdote. My anecdote is that I can watch the most violent, horrific movies you've ever seen. Whether it's Ichi the Killer, I don't know if anyone knows that movie, or Ebola Syndrome. I can watch those movies without a problem, right? But if I see an actual person, right, even if my finger was cut a little bit and I was gonna pass out, right? So it's like, if it's fake violence and I know it's fake, like I'm just like, all right, it's a movie, it's whatever. But if I see real violence, like if someone got shot, I would probably pass out, run, flee, vomit. I don't even know, because I've never seen it, thankfully.
I grew up watching ultra-violent movies and horror films from a very, very young age. Like I saw Vampire Hunter D when I was, I think, 7. Like I was a little kid and never, like, it doesn't bother me at all. And the real life violent situations I've encountered, I'm bothered by it, but I'm not like reactive to it. Like I'm very cool-headed in those kinds of situations. So it's hard. There's just anecdata. Like I don't have anywhere to go with that, but that's like one piece of like one person is that way. Media, I don't react to violent media. I don't react to real life violence, but it's not clear if there's a correlation between the two. I might just be weird. I doubt the movies made me that way.
Yeah. Well, and I always, when I hear this question, it goes down to a really deep philosophical issue that I don't have an answer for. But it kind of goes down to the assumption is, do you think humans are naturally violent or not? Like, do you think that's just part of us and it's already normal? Or do you think like we start as not being violent and these things make us violent? And I don't have the answer. But if you think of it as something that's already normal to people, wouldn't it be better to have violence in these virtual situations rather than Roman Colosseums where we're like actually killing each other for real?
Good. I think about that a lot in the sense of.
So like if we're naturally violent, right? It's like inherent in just being born. It's like, oh, violent already, right? Can't change that. Unless we're not human anymore or
and
something.
We need good video games to express that and compete with each other, kind of like how, play is built into mammals. All mammals play. Play teaches violent, dangerous skills in a way that isn't deadly to the players.
Right. So I don't have an answer, but I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Right. It is 12:30, so I guess we're done, and you can come ask us questions while we're standing here before I eat lunch.
Yep.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. We will post the slides on our website later tonight, so if you want to get all these citations and read these papers, we will post them there before midnight tonight.
If you want to listen to our podcast, you can come get this flyer here, and enjoy your MAGFest.
Thank you.